This is Agriculture Today, and I'm Shelby Varner with the K-State Radio Network. Beginning today's show is K-State Extension Beef Specialist Justin Waggoner as he explains how death loss in the cattle feeding industry has changed in the past 30 years and what might be contributing to the losses. David Schemm, Kansas Farm Service Agency State Executive Director, continues today's show as he provides an update on FSA programs and how they are working to continue serving producers. Reno County Extension horticulture agent Pam Paulsen ends the show discussing methods for building gardens that are resilient to tough growing conditions. That and more is coming up ahead. You're tuned in to Agriculture Today, and we start our show discussing death loss in the cattle feeding industry with K-State Extension Beef Specialist Justin Waggoner. Justin, thanks for joining us today.
Hey, good morning, Shelby.
Justin, as we're wanting to talk about a bunch of data and work that you've done when it focuses towards feed yards, can you explain to us the depth of data you have to talk about today?
Yeah, so the data that I'm going to be discussing today with your listeners is really derived from the Kansas State University Focus on Feedlots. So the Focus on Feedlots, some of the listeners may be familiar with it, but essentially it's a feedlot performance and closeout survey that we've conducted at Kansas State University for a number of years. Actually, the Focus on Feedlots, the history of it goes back well into the 1970s. It started out as an extension newsletter that captured some baseline data, some benchmarking, if you will, for the feedlot industry. And so it's just simply a monthly survey of 5 to 6 feed yards, mostly in western Kansas. We gather some performance information, days on feed, in weights, exit weights, average daily gain, death loss, as you mentioned there. It also records some other performance data like place cost to gain and a few other commodity prices and some things like that. And so what's really special about the Focus on Feedlots, if you will, is we've got the data electronically archived for about the last 34 years. And so having a 34-year data set to work with feed yard level data that's recorded both animal performance as well as some commodity prices, that's just a really incredibly valuable data set, I think, for other academics. It's widely used to refer back to that, as it's really the only publicly available source of data of its kind. So it's really a special data set to work with here at K-State.
And focusing towards death loss today, what are some of those high-level big points you see when you look at that data?
So when we look at the data and we take kind of a historical long-term approach, looking at death loss from, really over that, I'll call it 1992 to 2024 time period, one of the things that we see in that long-term trend analysis for death loss is that death loss has steadily increased in the cattle feeding industry or in the Focus on Feedlot data set. If we look at the yearly averages from 1994 and compare those to 2024, I think this really kind of speaks to the difference. So average steer death loss reported in 1994 was 0.73% for steers and 0.78% for heifers. So below 1%. That's kind of the take-home message there. In 2024, our average death loss in the data set was 2.25% for steers and 2.4% for heifers. So we've certainly seen an increase over time within the last 34 years. It's about a 0.04% increase per year for heifers, and about a 0.03% increase in that death loss for steers. And so, that's one of the things as we think about, just trends over time that really raises a lot of questions. If you think about, our feeding management technologies, cattle health, et cetera, we'd like to think that we're doing a better job in some of these areas. However, when we look at the data from the Focus on Feedlots, that's not the answer it tells us, right? And so there's really been a lot of questions. I think there's a lot of research efforts at K-State as well as other institutions. We're very aware of this in the industry, right? It's certainly important to us. It's economically relevant. We want to do the best job that we can in terms of taking care of cattle each and every day in the feed yard. So increasing our understanding of death loss is really one of the current topics that I think there's a lot of effort going into. So one of the things that I really took the task on, having a 30-year data set to work with was, there's some things that we can use the focus on feedlots to start to increase our understanding of death loss in the industry. One of the things we see in those historical patterns is some seasonality associated with death loss. When we talk to cattle managers, we get this sentiment of, it really seems like death loss has gotten a lot higher recently. And so one of the things I did recently with the data was, start to take the data apart a little bit and just understand it a little bit more. So I took our data and the focus on feedlots. We have complete death loss data starting in about 1994, and I divided it out into 10-year chunks. And so looking at death loss from 1994 to 2003, we do see an increase in feedlot death loss during that 10-year period. I also then looked at our death loss from 2004 to 2013, so that next 10-year period. And one of the things that's interesting about that is we see a little more variability in death loss. So highs and lows tend to be more variable in that period. But death loss is relatively flat, fairly consistent for that 10-year period. Then if we go from 2014 to 2024, death loss starts to increase again. We see that, it becomes increasingly variable. And so that's really interesting to see how death loss has maybe changed a little bit over time in those 10-year periods. And I think really the baseline here is that helps us to understand that overall historical 34-year trend. And if we think about that sentiment from cattle managers of, wow, it just seems like death loss has gotten a little bit higher. So I think we can answer that question. The other piece of that is seasonality of death loss. And so I looked at the impact of closeout month on death loss, and we see a significant relationship between closeout month and how that impacts death loss. And what we see here is really a pattern of seasonality starts to emerge, where death loss is lowest in September and October for both steers and heifers, then steadily increases, and we see death loss at the yard level peak, I would say April and May. So we see this for both steers and heifers. It's very seasonal. Maybe see our highest death loss rates in the second quarter of the year, if you will, if you look at our data. Another thing that's interesting is for most months, the death loss between steers and heifers is relatively similar. Heifers do tend to be a little higher in terms of death loss. But the other thing we noted as we looked at the data a little bit closer is that heifer death loss rates stay higher than their steer counterparts as we get through the months of June, July, and August. So through those traditional summer months on feed. So it's really interesting to see, that clear pattern of seasonality for both steers and heifers, but that we also see some months where maybe heifers that are going to close out, heifers that would close out in those months. So we do want to clarify that may have higher rates of death loss. And so I think that's really, as we start to build strategies and intervention strategies and identifying higher risk cattle, I think, understanding the seasonal pattern of death loss maybe helps managers make some of those decisions as they're building those treatment plans together. Another factor that we commonly comes up in discussions about death loss is days on feed. And we know that in the cattle feeding industry, we're certainly increasing the number of days on feed that cattle are on feed currently in the industry. We continue to market cattle at heavier exit weights. So if we look at death loss during that same 30-year period from 1994 to 2024, and we look at the relationship between death loss and days on feed, we do see a strong linear relationship for both steers and heifers. Meaning that those two are certainly linked. As we increase days on feed, we see an increase in death losses. That's how I very simply put that. Where it really becomes interesting is that the strength of the relationship or the strength of the line here, it tells us that the relationship between days on feed and death loss, that days on feed alone really only explains 50 to 60% of the variability that we see in death loss. And so the big take home for me when I look at this data is, yes, there is a relationship between days on feed and death loss, and we expect that, right? As we increase days on feed, death loss is going to go up. However, there's a number of other factors that are still impacting feedlot death loss outside of just days on feed. And so I think that really speaks to, the importance of, therapeutic interventions and metaphylaxis treatments, and just, really kind of speaks that it's not just all related back to days on feed, if you will.
Are you hoping to continue to do work to figure out what the other 40-50% is that is contributing to death loss?
Yeah, great question, Shelby. So as you really think about the data that we collect with the focus on feedlots, it's yard level data. We don't have a really a good amount of detail to be able to dive much deeper. What I can tell you is I think there's a number of different research groups. We talked earlier about the research that's really going on to understanding this issue. I think that's where we really start to find the answers in terms of, what the focus on feedlot data can tell us. Really, we can't dive too much deeper into it. We just don't have that depth of data to be able to use this data set for that purpose. But I do think the real value of this data set is just that 30-year snapshot of feedlot information and just really capturing that historical perspective and, starting to understand some of those relationships like the seasonality.
Do you think we'll ever see death loss start to go back down?
You really want to be an optimist, but when you look at our data, it's certainly increased over time. I would hope that we can certainly start to do that and start to see those rates start to flatline. Will we ever get back to those historically low death loss rates of less than 1%? That in aggregate, that's going to be that may be a challenge, but I think that's a very good goal that we certainly need to get to. I think the other take-home message that's within this data set, as producers are looking at running break-evens or projection analysis, right? What do we factor in for an acceptable level of death loss? And so that really warrants some consideration when you have a larger data set like this that would certainly say, hey, maybe 1%, isn't the number to use, but 1.5% might be, a better number to use to some respects, or to look at those true averages over time when we run those type of projections.
Justin, I appreciate you taking the time to join us today.
Thanks, Shelby.
That was K-State Extension beef cattle specialist Justin Waggoner. We're cutting to a short break now, but stick around because we have more for you up ahead. You're tuned in to Agriculture Today, and we continue our show with an update from the Kansas Farm Service Agency. And to give us that update, we're joined by State Executive Director of the Kansas Farm Service Agency, David Schemm. David, thanks for joining us today.
No problem, Shelby. Good to talk with you here again, and it's good to be back.
As you're back, wanting to touch on a few programs that have recently been announced, and starting with the Supplemental Disaster Relief Program Part 2.
Part 2, that's exactly right. So the Secretary, obviously some big news, just announced here recently some additional disaster programs to be coming out. And, we knew this was probably going to be coming out, earlier on, but those programs were still being worked on and developed. And so the announcement came out yesterday by Secretary Rollins and Undersecretary Fordyce talking about this SDRP Stage 2 here. Sign-up starts Monday, November 24th there. And the producers can kind of start going into offices then. But we do have a time frame here, Shelby, for producers to be able to go in there, because this sign-up stage goes and clear until April, the end of April here this next year. So producers still have time, plenty of time to be able to sign up there. And, I know our county offices are busy out there. Producers are a lot of other things going on, fall seeded acres, those winter wheat acres getting reported into our offices, everything like that. So offices are busy. So definitely reach out to those offices, get an appointment scheduled up with them. Always welcome to stop by the office, obviously, Shelby, to talk to them about signing up. But, this Stage 2 is going to, how would I say, there's going to be some forms that we need to make sure, and some information that producers will definitely need to make sure when they come in to apply for, and we're calling it the FSA Form 504. So that's going to be the SDRP Stage 2 form that they'll need to be filling out. And then there's also going to be some, various forms that they need to have already filled out there at the office there. A 901, 902 eligibility forms, a Form 2047. And a lot of these forms, Shelby, producers, especially if they've already engaged with FSA, will have those forms there already. One other form I would say is a little bit more specific towards the disaster programs, that if they did already apply for SDRP Stage 1, is the FSA 510 form. which is a payment limitation form there. Basically, what that form is saying for producers out there is that the payment limit is $125,000 for the Supplemental Disaster Relief Program, but there can be a higher payment limitation of $250,000 if they fill out this form to certify that at least 75% of their adjusted gross income comes from a farming operation. So, those guys who, their main livelihood is obviously farm and farm production there. They can have a higher threshold there for that limitation there. So, but one of the other additional information that I want to let producers definitely know that they'll want to have coming in is basically proof of production. SDRP 1 really focused upon, the large losses that a producer had from these qualifying disaster events. And stage 2 focuses upon the shallow losses that basically stage 1 didn't cover for these qualifying losses.
Can you remind us what some of those qualifying losses are?
Yeah, so the qualifying losses can be drought. We do have drought-eligible counties out there, excessive heat, wildfires, various things like that. Unfortunately, one of the questions that a lot of producers will come in wondering is that how I've heard it referred to me before is that great white combine or hail. Unfortunately, that is not a qualifying loss underneath this program because it's more of a large disaster area that it's focusing upon for qualifying losses. So again, drought, excessive heat, wildfires, flooding, those are the things that this disaster program is focusing on.
Have there been any other programs that have come into FSA?
Yeah, there has. Part of the announcement that the Secretary has made the other day is a milk loss program that has occurred. And so basically it's loss that our dairy producers had that had loss from because of price on that. So those dairy producers, I'd encourage them. Program has a lot of details in it there. So I would say for our dairy producers, if they're wondering on our MLP or milk loss program, please go into the county office and reach out to them. The other one there is our on-farm stored commodity loss program. And so this one here also has those natural disaster losses for producers that had grain stored on their farm. Again, and some of those disasters, again, it's that flood, possibly a wildfire, various things like that. So those producers, again, that had that damages, and again, those qualifying years are that 23, 24, and some in 25 year if it was stored grain, that those disasters occurred those years. And I should note too, Shelby, that the SDRP also has those same requirements for qualifying years there. And our producers, again, those that did not apply or did not qualify for our stage 1 SDRP program, that's what stage 2 is also addressing, is those disaster impacts that occurred in 23, 24, and some of in 25. So 23, 24, some commodities could be covered as well in 25.
As many operations in the state are at varying levels of being done with harvest, is there anything they need to be doing with the FSA office if they have wrapped up harvest?
Absolutely. A lot of our producers across the state have got that winter wheat drilled out there, and, they need to report those planted wheat acres, fall seeded crops into our county offices. There are some waiving of late file penalties for our producers, knowing that the government has been shut down, unfortunately, for a record 43 days. Underneath my tenure, I've got to have the 2 longest government shutdowns, which it's always a big challenge for our offices to get everything caught back up. So, a lot of this government shutdown has affected some of the deadlines, and that's some of the things from an agency perspective, Shelby, that we're going to make sure that we're obviously working for our producers and giving them opportunity to get signed up for these programs as moving forward there. So, as producers wrapped up that harvest there, we're back open, Shelby, here. So if they're interested in possibly doing a market assistant loan for the commodities that they have stored out there, various other things. Opportunity, obviously, get in there to the county office. We're open to try to help our producers. Again, got some of these new programs that we're going to be rolling out here, and we can, as we get our training, and that's what the staff is busy this week, is getting that additional training. So I'd caution producers, don't get into our offices this week here, because our staff is out there getting training here this week on these disaster programs. But starting next week, they're going to be trained and be able to provide more information to them.
Is there anything that producers may have missed during the 43-day shutdown that they should be receiving as you guys get rolling again?
Well, we're working on a lot of things. It's a busy time of the year, whether it's CRP payments going out, various things like that. From a producer perspective, our offices are really good working with our producers there. We'll be reaching out to them with something that they don't remember or that they need to do. We'll make sure we're doing our part to definitely communicate to our producers. And again, Shelby, so many things, so many different programs that we do administer. Our producers, I would just really encourage them. If you got questions, go into our county offices. Again, if you're asking about the disaster programs, you might wait here just a little bit, let them get trained. But some of the other programs, again, acreage reporting, possibly CRP, if it's a market assistant loan, whatever they have, maybe they do loans with our loan division here. Obviously, get in there, direct loans, farm ownership loans. Get in there, more than welcome. Come on in, talk with our people. We're busy, but we're always here to serve our producers across the state. And they're glad to be back. Have had several calls with the employees, and I know they're excited to be back and truly kind of get the work done that they know our producers need out there.
David, I appreciate you taking the time to join us today.
Thank you, Shelby.
That was State Executive Director of the Kansas Farm Service Agency, David Schemm. If you're wanting to find more information about the Farm Service Agency, you can do so by going online to Farmers.gov. Also, as David mentioned, the Farm Service Agency is now back in office. If you don't know where your most local service center is, you're also able to locate that by once again going to Farmers.gov. Before we cut to a break, I would like to let you know about an article that K-State and Washburn law professor Roger McOwen recently posted on agmanager.info. This article is titled Important Information for Kansas Farmers on the Hansen Muelle Company Bankruptcy Filing. If you are a Kansas farmer affected by the bankruptcy of Hansen Muelle Company, an Omaha-based grain company that has substantial operations in western Kansas, Roger has put together an article where you'll be able to find out more information. He lists action steps that he recommends taking. Once again, if you'd like to find this article, you can do so by going to agmanager.info, or of course, I will also link it in today's show notes on agtoday.net. We're cutting to a short break now on Agriculture Today, but stick around because we have more for you up ahead.
This is Agriculture Today. Along with Shelby Varner, I'm Jeff Wickman. Gardening in a changing climate can be a challenge. The November K-State Garden Hour explored how to establish gardens that are resilient to tough growing conditions. Some of the methods include native and adapted plants, soil improvement, efficient use of water and nutrients, and attracting beneficial insects. K-State Extension horticulture agent for Reno County, Pam Paulsen, says if you're growing native plants, choose plants that are adapted to the area.
In our changing climate, you want plants that are adapted to a wide range of growing conditions, because here in Kansas, we can get 110 and -10. And we're getting those big rain events as well as extended droughts. So the more flexible those plants can be to a wide variety of growing conditions, the better that they'll do. Select plants with a local provenance, meaning plants that, if you're collecting seed or plants that came from the local area, they're going to be best adapted to the local area. Select a variety of species for blooms throughout the growing season, so you have extended bloom time for all of those beneficial insects. Wait to plant them or to propagate them when it's a little bit cloudy and cooler. That gives them a better start. They do need a little bit of maintenance. Many of our plants will self-deadhead, but if you can go out and deadhead themselves, then they're not putting those resources into producing seed and fruit, and they'll continue to grow. plant more trees to absorb carbon dioxide, but also start looking at plants maybe that are a little more southern located. I'll often look at Oklahoma State at some of their plant lists to know what is a little more tolerant of more warmer temperatures that they get there. Another is to encourage biodiversity. So different rooting depths, different flowering times, intercrop vegetables and herbs with your ornamentals, so you can do some edible landscaping. Many of our vegetable plants have some great ornamental qualities as well. Doing this decreases fertilizer needs because you can plant your legumes with your flowers. It increases the beneficial insects and decreases pests and diseases by having that diversity. For resilient vegetable gardens, plant heat-sensitive crops where they'll get some afternoon shade, or look at some heat-tolerant varieties. Tomatoes and such, anything that says Florida or the Heat Master, they tend to be a little more heat-tolerant. When we do get some of those warmer temperatures, choose some varieties that mature quickly so you can plant them early and then they're not having to suffer and try to produce when we're getting those really hot temperatures. Look at some perennial vegetables, artichokes, asparagus, rhubarbs, fruit trees, and bushes. Those, again, are ones that will do more for holding carbon into the soil. The other is to look at parthenogenic cultivars, and these have been bred to fruit without the need for pollination. Many of these are what are growing in high tunnels, but the more hotter temperatures we get and the fewer insects and pollination that happens, some of these parthenogenic cultivars will produce more for us. Look at succession planting. Plant your radishes in 1 week and then wait another week to plant some more so that you have an extended crop. Crop rotation. Don't plant the same family of vegetables in the same spot year after year because those tend to cause the pests to build up in that area. So rotate those crops. Other things to do to make your garden resilient, create microclimates within your garden so that some of those more tender plants have a place to grow. Save your own seeds. Be fire smart because we are starting to see more wildfires as well. Ways to reduce some of the heat risk, grow plants along fences and walls, and those plants will kind of help keep temperatures down. Maximize ventilation and shading around your house, so grow trees on the west and the south side to shade the house, evergreens on the north side to help block some of the wind. And the other is to grow your own food and eat your own food or share it at least. Wasted food causes 58% of methane emissions from municipal solid waste landfills. So either, make use of the food that you're growing, share it, or put it in the compost pile. Don't put it into the landfill. You also want to take care of the gardener. When you're outside working early morning, cooler temperatures, make sure you're hydrated, wear sunscreen and sun protective clothing. Make sure you're watching out, and knowing when you're getting heat stressed and take frequent breaks.
That's K-State Extension Horticulture Agent for Reno County, Pam Paulsen. To listen to the full webinar, search for K-State Garden Hour and click on Most Recent Webinars. And that'll do it for this edition of Agriculture Today. For Shelby Varner, I'm Jeff Wickman. This is the K-State Radio Network.